Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, fellow students, and of course our guests. We are very happy to welcome you here at our panel discussion Prep Doc. Also a warm welcome to our viewers who have joined us today online via the live stream. And after a long time, we also want to welcome our audience here at the faculty club at the Institute for Advanced Study in Garching. We also want to thank our four guests who we will introduce to you in a second and who we will exchange hopefully interesting views on the topic of doctoral studies.
Exactly, but before we introduce our amazing guests, Monika and I want to quickly introduce ourselves to you. I am very happy to share the moderation with you, Monika. Monika is currently in her master's at TUM studying vocational education and is working at the Center for International Student Assessment. She's a former scholarship holder of class 2020 from the TUM Junge Akademie and current representative of the scholarship holders in the advisory board of TUM Junge Akademie. She is very interested in doing a doctorate in the field of educational research.
Yes, and Benji and I are really looking forward for an exciting conversation today. And Benji is studying mechanical engineering in his master's program at TUM and is working for a supplier for space engines and satellites. And he's also a scholarship holder of the TUM Junge Akademie of class 2022. And he and his project group Membranes focus on bio-inspired water filters for removing microplastic. And it's really great to be with you here today.
It's great to be with you too, Monika. And now I would ask you to give a warm welcome to our guests.
And now Benji and I invite you to join our panel discussion, Doctorate at TUM, an option for me. We will address various questions regarding the topic, should I do a doctorate or not? And in our opening panel, we would like to discuss some general aspects if you should do a doctorate or not. And after that, we will talk about the planning and application process of the whole doctorate thing. And in our last part of the discussion, we will focus mainly on tasks that you have to complete during your doctorate. And following the discussion, there will be also time for questions and answers from you, the audience, and also from our viewers who have joined us online today. And our guests on site are welcome to stay after the discussion for some appetizers and hopefully inspiring conversations with our panelists here at the Faculty Club.
Yes, but before we start into the discussion, we would like to use a common method to introduce yourselves to the audience. So for this, we're going to use the 4P method in the tradition of an elevator speech. And here's how it works. It's quite easy. You start by telling us your current profession, so that would be the first P. Next, you share a fact about something you like to do in your life, a hobby, so that would be something from your private life. That's the second P. Referring to that, you would tell the audience what would have been your plan B if you hadn't followed the profession you do now. So that's the third P. And last but not least, your potential opinion on a question. It's a yes or no question, pro-doc or no-doc. That's the fourth P. Is the principle clear for all of you? Yes? So in this case, I would suggest we start from right to left. Kathleen, would you please start?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Kathleen Seimer. So the first P is I'm currently an assistant professor here at TUM, just over there in the Center for Functional Protein Assemblies. And my professorship is called Protein Chemistry. So I'm somewhere at the interface between biology and chemistry with my research. The second P will be something private, right? So I guess I could tell you I really love the mountains. Whenever I have spare time, be it in winter for skiing or in summer for hiking, I do this. Also try to get my group out in the mountains every now and then. Then we had the plan B, right? Yeah, that was the third one. I would have loved to be an astronaut. Not sure if that's realistic, but like maybe plan C. Plan B, more realistically, would probably being a teacher, which I am, I guess, anyways, with this job. And then there was There were 5
Yes,
Ps, or
pro-doc
just
or no doc?
4 Ps. Yeah, pro-doc or no-doc. I mean, I'm obviously, I guess I have to be pro-doc here, even though I hope we will come to the conclusion that this is a very personal decision for everybody of you, whether that's the right path or not. For me personally, it was clearly a pro-doc.
Thank you. Joachim, would you like to follow?
Yeah, my name is Hans Mungotz. I'm a professor of mathematics and informatics here at TUM. I'm currently the dean of the informatics department and the graduate dean of the graduate school, so which means responsible for doctoral education TUM-wide. So the second P is a private thing, that's of course music, so I'm playing violin very actively. The third one is plan B. I never had a plan B since I never had a plan A. It just happened, and this is something which I think holds for many careers. Just let it happen, and then life puts you somewhere. It cannot be so wrong. And the last question, doctorate, yes or no? Of course, I would say yes, but not since I did it, but since I'm really convinced you can miss something later in life if you don't do it. You can hardly make anything wrong if you do it.
All right, yeah, that was a good insight. And Kathleen, would you like to continue, please?
So my name is Kathleen Schmalzel. I'm a research assistant at associate professorship at biomechanics in sports, and I'm a PhD student, and I'm also a member of TUM Junge Akademie of class 22, so private. I love to play tennis, and I actually love all kinds of sports. And the plan B would have been, I would have loved to be a yoga teacher, and I'm completely pro-doc.
All right, then, Karl, your
Hi,
opinion.
my name is Karl Ebbinghaus. I'm currently working for BMW in the development of entertainment systems and related systems in the car. The private part is currently, besides work, I'm a passionate dad, so I spend a lot of time with my son, and then there is a little bit of time for sports, which I also like. Plan B would have maybe been a PhD, so I did sports science and electrical engineering, and going into that direction was an idea of mine, which I then didn't follow. And pro-doc or no doc, well, I'll take the way out that was given to me before. For me, the no was a good decision, looking back. But for others, I don't know. Let's see.
All right, thanks to all of you. Some pretty interesting insights, I guess many of us didn't know before. So with that, let's start with the first block of our panel.
Yes, definitely. At TUM Junge Akademie, which kindly organized this event here, it can be said that more than 80% of the scholarship holders pursue a doctorate. In the short introduction, you already stated your core opinion about pro or contra doc, but now we would like to dig a little deeper with you. The following question therefore invites all of you to briefly share your own experiences and opinions. Would you rather recommend or advise against a doctorate? If it's okay with you, we follow the same order as just before. So Kathleen, if you could start again.
So sharing my own experience with the doctorate?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think for me it also was never really a question not to do it, because I love science. I enjoyed my undergraduate studies a lot. I studied chemistry but moved more and more into biochemistry. I was fascinated by also being exposed to certain researchers, especially in my diploma thesis back in the days, which I also did abroad. And I thought I really want to dig deeper and be a scientist, and definitely also like the idea of at some point maybe being a professor, this combination of teaching and doing research. And for this, there was a clear yes for the PhD, and I had a very good experience. Maybe we talk about details later, but for me it was a very inspiring time. Lots of good friendships originated from that time, because you definitely spent a lot of time together, in this case in a lab for me. I enjoyed it a lot. I think it was very free in the decisions that you make, how you want to work, on what you want to work, and that was my very positive experience, I would say.
Joachim,
Yeah,
your
so
turn.
concerning, there are different dimensions. The first one is probably career expectations. I think that's very complicated to tell anything about that because it's very sector dependent, it's very country dependent. In some fields you need it more, in some fields you need it less, in some it helps, in others it does not help. But I think what is more important is the fun dimension. So it was one of my goals to avoid as much as possible to have ever a boss. And I think this is one of the best things of the job of a professor, that you actually don't have a boss. There are some people like a president or a minister who could raise their voice, but anyway, they cannot give you orders. And that was also true. It was my expectation, and it was actually really true in the doctoral phase. You are, to a very large extent, you are master of your own process. Of course, you have to do things like teaching also, but this is this is all something you know in advance. But the really PhD-related thing is a process which you have at a very large extent in your own hand, and you get advice, you get help, you get different opinions, but you don't get orders, and this is something which I love very much, and that's why I also do not regret it a single minute to have doing it.
Kathleen, you are currently doing your doctorate, so maybe you could give us insights from your actual life.
Yeah. So what was a decision for me to do a doctorate, and why I would recommend doing a doctorate? I mean, of course, it depends on your future goals, but I like the combination of doing a project, and on the other hand, also you can teach students, and it's kind of interesting to me. And if you're really interested in research and science, I can definitely recommend doing it.
And Karl, the last one.
So maybe I should say I started a position at MCTS thinking about a PhD, and then didn't find the right topic for me, but also noticed I want to try more stuff. And I felt like in the industry right away I can try more stuff. Like I said, it's a very individual topic if you want to do it or not. I think from experience with friends and colleagues, it can be quite tedious sometimes. I mean, we already heard it's a long time in the lab, or doing your stuff alone for quite a while. And I think the industry also gives you opportunities to try different stuff. And if you have some sort of mentality to say, I'm not going to let people demand too much of me, and say, okay, I order you to do this. My boss also cannot really order me to do a lot. Yeah, I can find another position. And in the end, to me, it turned out well without doing the PhD. But I also really like science and understand why people do it and pursue it. So I'm still a fan of scientific method. Just yesterday, about in a project about future ideas for the car, I brought up with a pre-development team to say, hey, which hypotheses are you testing with that stuff you're building right now? So in the end, I'm still a fan of science and understand why people do it.
All right, I guess that was a good view on your opinion to start the round. And many of our listeners in the audience today are obviously interested in doing a doctorate. And a question that probably often pops up into their minds is if they actually have what it takes to do a doctorate. I mean, is it a question of personality or discipline or something that everybody can achieve? So how do I recognize if I'm talented enough to become a researcher? And I guess this question is mostly geared to our experienced professors, because you probably have already supervised doctoral students. So Hans-Joachim, could you please elaborate on what you're looking for in a doctoral candidate?
That's a very complicated thing, like if you ask for a recipe of a very complicated dish. So there are many ingredients. Of course, there are the classical performance indicators, so grades, So there's a reason why at TUM there's a rule that you have to have at least a grade of 2.5, at least normally to go into a PhD, because it typically addresses, in some extent, the better students, however you would like to call it, because there are some challenges that pop up and that might be actually far more complicated than the things what you see on the assignment sheets in studies. That's one point. But I think in general it is probably a bit overestimated. Things which are extremely important is really enthusiasm and fun. So don't take any topic just because it seems to be a hype topic. So everyone wants to do machine learning these days for whatever scientific discipline. So if you just do it because you think you have to do it because it increases your chances, so this is complicated, because you have to work for 3-4 years on that topic, and it is not a problem to overcome these difficult periods if you love it, but it is a problem if you permanently ask yourself, why the hell am I doing it? And that's why I really think motivation, enthusiasm, really the will to find a solution to something, this has to be there. Then of course also something which is needed is some kind of a long-term perspective. So in terms of sports, you don't need sprinter qualities. What you need is marathon qualities. So of course there are these sprints. Next week, Friday, there's a deadline for the paper and it has to be done, and then you don't sleep for 2 nights, and that's all normal. This is not pressure or stress, that's just normal. But the big thing is the long perspective. So and if you get exhausted after 5 kilometers, you cannot do a marathon, and if you lose attraction or whatever after 1 year, this also becomes complicated. So I think this is then these days also, it depends a bit on the topic, but these days something which is extremely important is team capabilities. So this is also something people, in my experience, underestimate, because they think that a doctorate is something individual, and of course it is. You get an individual grade. It has to be something which is assigned to you. You have to do it for the first time ever, and pipapo. But on the other hand, if you look at complicated lab things, if you think in physics what happens at CERN, if you think at a software construction or whatever, this is not something one person does. The thing is typically too big in pure amount of work, but it is also too big in scientific facets. You need engineering skills, you need science skills, you need this and that. So this is, most of the things at the end of the day are team products. So if someone just is kind of the eremit living in his cabin and thinking and calculating, okay, there are some scientific fields where this is still, I don't know, philosophy or number theory, where this is still the way to the goal. But I think in general, this is also something you have to be open for any kind of collaboration, cross institutions, cross topics, with other groups, with your office mates. Don't think, oh, this is my topic, and if the others learn about my topic, then I lose something. So I think this is kind of a short window of the things which are important.
Yeah, so you mentioned a lot of important character traits or also skills. Kathleen, what do you think are those character traits that also make you a great doctoral candidate, or do you find yourself in some of the answers that Hans-Joachim mentioned?
Yeah, I completely agree. So once a postdoc told me, of course it is an advantage if you have discipline, of course it is an advantage if you have already knowledge in this field of interest. But really one of the most important things is that you love what you do, that you are intrinsically motivated, and that you have this stamina to do your project over that long time. I mean, you work for several years with the topic, and if this is what you really want to do, I think time flies.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, and now we're going to go to the next topic, which we heard of a little bit before because the word career fell. There is general belief in society that doing a doctorate predestines you for a career in the academic or medical field, but yet taking a look at the management board of the DAX companies, for example, almost 50% of the top managers have doctorates. Karl, what role does a doctorate play in the industry today? And you said you work at BMW. I think 3 out of 7 members of the board have a doctorate. So
it's less than half.
So that's true, but it's, yeah. But
so maybe it's better without. It's a good question, and I discussed this actually with my team this morning when I said I'm coming here. And I think not just my answer, but also their answer, it really depends. Obviously, at first glance, people might think, oh, this is a person who wants more in a career, more out of his career. But as soon as your boss gets to know you, as soon as others get to know you, they figure out what you want to do, how much you're willing to do. And I don't feel like it makes a big difference. It might give you a first head start a little bit in the heads of people. But on the other hand, if you're starting an industry and starting your career earlier, you also have a heads up, or you catch up again. It depends on what you want and if you know what you want. So I don't really see it as a huge disadvantage not having it, or as a huge advantage having it. One topic that does come to mind, though, is if you're working in a big company like BMW, there's a lot of people doing a PhD. You get that network almost automatically because you're collaborating with them, or you have some meetups, and that helps you. But you can also create or build your network otherwise, like just by collaborating with people and, let's say, caring about your colleagues, trying to have fun together, and therefore I don't see it as a huge disadvantage or as a huge advantage. You should really more focus on whether you want to do it and not do it because of career steps. If that's the reason, I would think it's the wrong reason. Yeah.
Thank you. Joachim, you worked, you did your doctorate in cooperation with Siemens, I think, if I'm right on this. So it's also a big German company from the DAX. Would you say the same as Karl, or would you disagree on this?
So first, I would like to add a brief comment. I think we should not mix up correlation and causality. So if you look at the board of the big companies, for example, one funny thing is, so if you look at pupils that had a, as we call it in German, humanistic education, so classical Latin and classical Greek, they are far more frequent in leadership positions than people from normal schools. But the reason is not that they learned ancient Greek. The reason is it's just a matter of fact that a specific personal profile and parents with a specific personal profile send their kids there. So there is a very strong correlation with this kind of education, but there is no causality. And I think it is the same holds to some extent for the doctorate. People that have a doctorate that fulfills in many cases exactly the profile someone is looking for a specific position. But it is not the reason, you don't have a doctorate, you cannot enter this door. This happens very, very rarely. So I think this one has to keep in mind there is a correlation, but it is not in the sense of it is kind of a reason or an unnecessary condition. Then the thing with Siemens, it's actually funny because I didn't do it in cooperation with Siemens, it was just funded by Siemens. And once I had finished it, I went to Siemens Corporate Research in Neuperlach and wanted to present the result and the final thesis to someone, and actually there was no one there who had any idea who I was and what I wanted to do. And at the end I ended up in the office of a member of the board because no one else, and they were a bit ashamed, and then they led me to I think that was for the board member for finances or whatever, and this person then offered me a job. And actually, this is not something I wanted to get there. I just wanted to hand over my results to the people who had funded it. But so that's why I have a very ambivalent thing. But so what I think is what is important that the German classical industry, and that's now industry in a very broad sense. Chemistry, it's extremely widespread, but also mechanical engineering. Also, if you look at the publishing houses, at the television things, a lot of those people who are heading something, the political group or whatever, they have a doctorate in something. This is just kind of a German tradition. If you go to Google, the situation is completely different. There, with a doctor, you are probably an endangered minority. So, so this depends much more on traditions and on how the setting is. So I would never do a doctorate for a career purpose in either direction. So the decision for a doctorate, yes, also not the no way. It should not be driven by the career, it should be driven by the situation. Would you like to do for 3 or 4 years something which is not following maybe a purpose? So there are, of course, people are looking frequently for something which has some application, and it is nice if you don't do some esoteric stuff, but there also has to be place for this kind of esoteric stuff, for strange number theory or archaeological things no one is really interested in. But there is a piece of research and people are working on that, and that's fine. And the question should be, is this what I want to do for the next years, or is it something different? Do I want to found a company, or do I want to finally make these silly auto-producing companies in Germany really get on the modern track, and I want to enter BMW and change the company and really move something? And then this can be a very strong decision not to go for that. But this has to be the decision, and not where do I want to be in 15 years, and do I need these 2 letters or don't I need them?
Thank you both for your answers. I think
yeah. So now that we've heard that a doctorate is more or less beneficial in some areas than in others, I would like to follow up right here with the next question, because I was wondering if you plan your career, and especially the career that is still ahead of you in the field of academia, is it necessary to have a doctorate? Because I feel like it is less common not to have one. Kathleen, could you maybe elaborate on that? Or
I mean, that's probably one of the few cases where we can clearly say it is necessary, right? I mean, you're not going to be a professor at a German university without a doctorate. That is, I think, pretty well.
We have a TUM.
Yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I mean, maybe also just adding up to what was just said, me coming more of the chemistry, out of the chemistry field, it is very, very common. I would say it is also almost still, even though it's due to traditions, a requirement, right? If you want to enter even like industry jobs, be a lab head or something there, that is somewhat of a requirement to have a PhD. So I would say probably out of our master's program, I would, not knowing the numbers exactly, would guess that probably 80% of the people go for doctorates. So in the natural sciences, it's still very common, especially in chemistry. But I agree with everything that was said before, that this really needs, you know, your motivation, your enthusiasm, your own drive. Yeah. So,
by the way, question to the audience. What is the field of TUM where we have professors without a doctorate? What do you think?
Management? Management?
I don't think so. I think they all have. No, we all have.
Education?
Those who know, who I know, all have. So architecture.
okay.
So this is very closely related to art, and their qualification is typically going through buildings. So they have had a couple of large projects, and if you have been doing that, this is kind of a scientific qualification, and this counts more than a classical education. So there was even a former vice president from architecture without a PhD. So it's a minority, and I would completely agree on the average, but there are cases, yeah.
Yes, so now I would like to close this first block of today's panel. From what I took away is that motivation is the key thing here, and you shouldn't do a doctorate if it's just for your career, because I think you can go everywhere where you want to without a doctorate too. There is a little specification maybe for chemistry. If you want to go to the industry there, but for almost all the other jobs, it's fine also without a doctorate. So now we're going to the next block, and I will start right away. Kathleen, what are the most important steps in planning your doctorate, and what is the corresponding application process?
Okay, so maybe we start with the second part because that comes first,
yeah.
Right? So, I mean, if you guys want to apply to a professor or even an advertised position, I think it's, again, important to make clear why you're motivated to work there, right? So if you write your letter, make clear what really drives you, and this is what I look for also when I scan through applications. I mean, clearly we talked about qualifications and so on and grades and things, but really someone who in a clear language, in a couple sentences, convince me why he or she wants to be with me and work with me. That's certainly something that you should think of very hard and then try to write that in your letter, right? Yeah, so that's the application process. I mean, it depends a bit. There's proper graduate schools where you go through a very formal process, potentially also having interviews, being matched with supervisors then. But I guess, especially in Germany, it's still very common to just write the professor you're interested in and, be invited for an interview. These days, it's often just via Zoom, it's virtual. I mean, I typically have people give a short presentation about their master thesis so that my group can also discuss with them then scientifically. Afterwards, I typically step out of the meeting, have the candidate chat with my group members and ask all the questions they want to ask, because it in the end also has to be a personal fit, right? So it's not just about hiring the person with the perfect qualification, but also someone who would fit in well socially with the rest of the team for sure. And I mean, yeah, this is mainly what I'm looking for here.
Right, yeah, I guess this information will be definitely helpful to our students who are currently applying or thinking about applying for a doctorate. And maybe, Hans-Joachim, can you tell us more about specific details when it comes to the content or topics that you're looking for, or how to structure your doctorate so that you have like specific projects, or how does that work if you?
No, for the first step, I think one has to be aware that there are completely different systems. So if you apply for access to a doctorate, for example, at the US university, you just send an application, have to fulfill these forms and all these things, have to give references without knowing anyone. So here it's completely different. 95%, for example, in my group of our doctoral candidates, they were all homegrown, coming from all countries of the world, but doing their master here. So we know them, and they know us. So no surprises concerning the topics, no surprises concerning the climate in the group, no surprises concerning the level of supervision. And I think this is something which is completely different, for example, here. So that's also the reason why I typically do not take too much care of these emails coming from all over the world. Respected sir, blah, blah, I would like to do. And I think, yes, nice. So that's kind of a thing one has to be aware of. So if you're studying here, and you want to do it here, the strategy is probably not that much writing nice documents, but just addressing, going to a group, making a seminar, a lab course, and a thesis there, and then addressing them, talk to the assistants, and then you typically, so that's how we function, you come on a list of observation. By the way, this starts very, very early. We have, even in the first and second semester, we have students which we closely observe. So not in the sense of Big Brother, but in the sense of development and whether they are interested in joining us. And this is something that has to be reciprocal also from your side. But if you want to apply elsewhere, that's completely different. Then you have to fill these forms and to try also in a motivation letter, try to fulfill the criteria people are expecting. This is a mix of expertise, a mix of motivation, interest, and dedication, and so on. And structuring the thing, I think that's a bit complicated, because a real PhD project has its own dynamics. So one can make plans, but I think the more these plans really come true, the less it has been a real PhD project. So because a doctorate project lives from really new insights, change of pathways every month, and so that's why you cannot plan it too far. Of course, there's a kind of a rough structuring, and starting with the literature and checking what the others are doing, and then focusing on something, and then at the end going to the harvesting in terms of publications and so on. But but too much looking ahead, planning, structuring. I always think this is it would be nice, but it's probably not that realistic.
Okay, yeah, I see.
We are forced to do that beforehand even, right? We write our grants and get the funding for the PhD work, so we also pretend we have a plan that we, show to the candidates beforehand. And also in the graduate school, right, people write this exposé, like this proposal, which I think is a very good thing to start your PhD with, this kind of trying at least to structure yourself. But I fully agree, you typically have then these detours.
It's probably because we are forced to do that, we know that it is of limited range.
And it's also good, I think. I mean, once you start, and let's say first year, second year, very often, at least in experimental thesis, things just don't work, right? I mean, you will spend a lot of time in a lab, doing work, working hard, thinking hard, but often you've worked for 2 weeks and it was completely for nothing. And that's also something you have to be able to deal with. This is often something that the really good students have a hard time with, right? Because they're usually not used to failure. But that's part of the scientific process. But if you have this document and you can go back to, okay, what was my actual plan? I mean, if it's a good proposal, you may also have a plan B already written down in your proposal, and then you have something to hold on to and go back to. That's why I think it's good to start with that in the beginning, with the structuring process. But I fully agree, often what comes out in the end, the more interesting results is probably the ones you didn't expect beforehand.
Yeah, okay.
So to sum up, you have to be flexible.
Yeah, and tolerate this frustration also, that things don't work out the way you may have initially planned it.
Yeah, and also, what is a scientific result? People frequently think that only the obvious success is a scientific result, but also that the insight that this production way will not lead to a vaccine is a scientific result, because then you can prevent industries from investing years in development if you know that this won't work. So there is frequently the attitude that only if you win it, if you have a positive thing, of course, in the BioNTech sense also, this is kind of course, this is the famous thing, but also from a, for example, from a mathematical point of view, a proof that something cannot work is of high scientific value, because next generations of scientists, they don't need to think about how it works. If you have proven it cannot work, no one else has to deal with that anymore. So that's also, that's why this kind of, these frustration effects sometimes are, they are of course frustrating, but they are sometimes also of a value, because they also contribute to the state of the art.
Okay, yeah. As we've already touched on briefly, the selection of the perfect doctoral candidate is very important. But now I want to take a look at the other perspective. Kathleen, what should I pay attention to when it comes to choosing my supervisor? How did you choose yours?
So I think this is a very serious decision, or at least you should take it serious. What was very important for me, as was already mentioned before, that you have a good connection to your potential supervisor, to the team of the chair or the professorship, since you have to work there for years. And you also should have a look at whether your potential supervisor has enough time to supervise you, and if there is sufficient support. And of course also the topic should be of interest to you. And to find out if these points are really true for you, you can also do like a kind of interview with your potential supervisors and ask the most important questions that can also be like critical questions, because it's important to see how the supervisor reacts to your questions.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Kathleen, you just said potential supervisors in the plural. Maybe you could also answer to this. Do you think it is good for a doctorate candidate to have a couple of supervisors maybe? Then they could have maybe more time for him or her, or what is your opinion on this?
Well, this will happen in many cases anyway. Yeah. So if you have some kind of an interdisciplinary project, so there is someone from medicine and someone from informatics. If you have an international collaboration, there's someone from DTU in Denmark and someone from here. If you are in a larger group, there is typically a professor, but you also have a postdoc as a person you are attached to. So I think this kind of a more diverse supervision and mentoring situation is more the standard. I think that you really have this kind of image that there's the wise teacher and the diligent scholar, and they work together and they discuss. So this is kind of a picture which happens still, and it's fine, but this is not the majority. So the majority is today that it is a much more diverse situation. By the way, also with a lot peer-to-peer mentoring and supervision. This is also underestimated. These kind of lunchtime discussions between doctoral candidates. I made recently this experience. Good, then I don't have to do this. This is also extremely helpful. So it's not only a vertical thing, it's also a horizontal thing, and this shows also that in advance you should not only check the supervisor, you should also check the whole group, the whole atmosphere. There are groups that are very competitive. So who is the best doctoral candidate? And some people like that. Others are more looking for a more socialized atmosphere. We are all one team working together. And so this is also something which is important, that you come into an ecosystem, into a research ecosystem that really fits to you and vice versa.
Yeah, all right. And now, like coming from planning your doctorate to actually starting it, another thing that many people probably don't know is that doing your doctorate can be pretty expensive, because alone publishing your doctoral thesis online on open access can cost you between 4,000 to 6,000 euros. And the majority of doctoral students, around 61%, work either at a research institute or are employed at a university. However, there are differences here as well. Looking at TUM specifically, the TUM School of Engineering, for example, offers mostly 100% doctorate positions, and TUM School of Social Sciences and Technology mostly offers 65% positions. So that makes a huge difference at the end of the month. And Karl, maybe you can elaborate on that this relatively small salary compared to what you can earn in the industry influence your decision back then to not do a doctorate, or?
To me, it didn't really make a big decision. So I was in a lucky position to, I would have been able to cope with that. I also think maybe that's a nice thing about a PhD. You keep going on a lower budget that you're used to as a student. You don't jump into high budget, buying a car, buying a suit, buying whatever just for work. For for me it didn't play a big role. But obviously it's a time where you probably, in most professions or in most directions, you will probably earn a bit less. But I think most people at that time are used to it from being a student. So I think if you can somehow keep going, this shouldn't be the reason why you decide pro or against a doctorate.
Yeah, okay, I see. And Hans-Joachim, can you maybe give us an insight on the huge differences between the faculties, like position-wise?
Yeah. So first, I would say that the statement PhD is expensive is a bit dangerous. I would even say it is wrong. So this raises the impression that you have to pay something. So there are universities where you have to pay a tuition fee when you want to do a PhD. This is here not the case. So the only thing which really could be expensive is if you want to pay someone else for writing your thesis, but this would be not legal, by the way. But I think here it is in many situations, in particular at a technical university, it's a bit different in the humanities, but there's a situation where you really have a job. It's not the best paid job, yes, but this is a job where you can, I think, live from, even in a town like Munich. So that's why I don't like this formulation that it is really expensive that much. And now to the differences in the disciplines. Yes, I mean, this has to do with market situation. Yeah, you have to be careful that it doesn't sound now in a way how I don't want it to sound. But if you are making a PhD in history of arts or in philosophy, what is the alternative? So the alternative is probably taxi driving or whatever. So which means there is no vivid market. If you go to the IT or to the engineering sector, and this is currently our problem, the amount of money, for example, companies like Facebook or Google pay to graduates from university is sometimes in the area or higher than a professor's salary is. So this raises some competitiveness, and that's why the funding agency says if we give such kind of projects to engineering or to informatics, it does not make sense to give them 65% positions. They won't find anyone. So this is kind of a reaction to reality. You can call it not fair, but this is the established system also that DFG, for example, has some subjects where they pay 100%, some subjects where they pay 75%, and even less. But this is just also, to some extent, the result of the market situation. Then it's also a question of how many of the students do it. So the number of PhD positions you have as a department is limited. So then if, for example, in chemistry, most of the students run into that, you have N positions for M candidates, and then if the M is extremely huge, and if everyone wants to have something, then you get the idea of splitting positions, having half or a third or this kind of positions. If in engineering you have problems in filling your positions because the number of candidates it's not that high, the starting conditions for those candidates, of course, is far better because they can say, okay, if you don't pay me 100%, I will go elsewhere, and then, okay, so let's do it. So I would say this is not something which is intrinsically related to the scientific field. It is just a kind of a response to the real situation we have here on the academic and also on the non-academic labor market.
Yeah, okay, I see. And besides like being employed at a university, there's also the option of getting a scholarship for your time that you're doing your doctoral studies. So Kathleen, I think you got a scholarship for your doctorate. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Mm-hmm. So there's certainly these options for fellowships. I think it becomes even more important for the next steps then, so for postdoc positions and so on. So I personally had a PhD fellowship from the Studienstiftung, so German Academic Fellowship Foundation, I think it's called if you translate it. And to be honest, this was even a lower amount of money than I would have gotten as a normally employed student, but then of course the institute was nice enough to top that up. That's also what we do currently. So in my team, my first 2 PhD students that are hired, they've also been writing proposals. They both received fellowships. And if it was less than the positions that I can't pay them with the normal DFG-based funding, we top that up. So it shouldn't be a disadvantage, but you have to think of it. It's of course great for your CV and so on. But even the highly paid fellowships, this is just, you know, tax-free money. It means you're not paying into any social security things. So let's say you're unemployed after your PhD, you may not get as much money as someone who was employed previously. You don't pay into your Rente, you know, like pension funds. So you have to insure, you have to have your own insurance. So there's a couple things to think about, but I think in general, at least that's my philosophy, if people want to have such a fellowship, I support them in writing this proposal, and I make sure that they by no means have less money than anybody else in the lab, and I think then it makes sense. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's also a question of obligations and speed for many. So if you have a scholarship, then of course you are not in an employment condition. Again, there's no boss, so you don't have typically, sometimes groups organize it in a different way, but you don't have these kind of obligations that come with an assistant position, typically writing proposals, teaching and organizational stuff at the group. So this is, in sometimes this leads to the fact that people are really done faster, and this is kind of an argument for some people. Others prefer more getting the whole package, both in experience but also in exchange with the people, also getting the bit more in terms of money, because, for example, they want to found a family already or so on, and so this is also kind of an individual situation which gives defines the decision in whether a scholarship situation or an employment situation is better for you.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Yeah. But really, I think if you go for this academic career, the next steps, it's even more important that you show that you get independent funding in the form of a postdoc fellowship then, or things like this. I think on the PhD level, it's totally fine to say I have this paid position, it's a funded position, and you go for that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes, thank you. And now, after talking about financing, which is, I think, one of the most important topics here, we're going to speak about moving. For many candidates, also for a PhD, it usually involves several years of commitment to a supervisor and a department and a team. And for many, there can be also a loyalty problem. So they stick to the team and the department, and then they don't go abroad. Don't spend some time abroad for their thesis. But do you think that this assumption is still relevant today? Or do you support the mobility of doctoral students, for example, through stays abroad for research purposes? Kathleen, first I would like to invite you to answer that question. What do you do with your doctoral students who want to move to another lab, for example?
I mean, depends a bit on the project, the situation. So we have a couple of collaboration projects where this is already part of the deal in the beginning. So that's even part of the rules that come from a certain funding agency, for instance. So we're part of one network where we have international collaboration partners, and it's definitely planned that the students have a couple months stay at least abroad. But also for the others, it's more about, what you want to learn, what would be the reason to go to a different lab, or maybe even a little industry thing if that fits with the project. So I would fully support that, but I guess it's not, standard for every PhD and every project. It must make sense somehow. The other way around, I mean, I have not just recruited from inside TUM, because if you come as a new professor, people don't know you, and of course you want to hire, and then you do look at your outside applications, you use social media, you tweet about open positions, and then there's a lot of applications coming in that you can also find really good ones amongst. So I have a quite international team, and I like that. So I like people also coming from abroad to me for the PhD, and that makes also maybe the experience in my group already a bit more international, and yeah, that's maybe another way of you know, finding these connections also with other labs, because people have been previously to other groups and other universities. But yeah, to answer the question, it depends. It must somehow fit with the project, but there is already, if you really want that, if you say that's important to me, I want to spend at least 1 year somewhere abroad, there are programs where this is already intrinsically part of the deal. Typically collaborative projects between different countries, different universities, or even industry and universities. Yeah.
All right, yeah, we also think that the mobility of doctoral students is really important, and since we've both spent some time abroad, it has definitely well enriched our studies and also our personal development. And coming right back to what you just said, you also spent quite some time abroad. Would you, if for a doctorate candidate, would you say that it needs to be planned ahead? If so, how far ahead, if they really want to go abroad?
I mean, it's always good to plan these things a bit in advance, especially if you want to have funding for travel and these kind of things. There's application deadlines and so on. But I think there's different, you know, times where you can do that already during your studies. I mean, I'm really a big fan of people who go for master thesis abroad. I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, a full PhD abroad is an option, and then afterwards, if you want to do that, postdoc is a perfect time to visit another university, another country again. And I think it's a good idea to not just stay in this one place throughout your whole scientific training, because it really changes your mind if you see how other groups work, how other PIs supervise, how, you know, other universities work. And for me, this was always a great experience to be in different places. Yeah. But it's again personality. I mean, you may have very good reasons, family, for instance, to not travel the world like crazy, and there is, of course, this option as well. But if you are free and you want to, and you think that would really add something to you and your experience, go abroad and visit other places. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Since it seems like not that you have to decide if you want to go abroad at the beginning of your doctorate, Kathleen, would you consider a stay abroad during your doctorate, or what is the plan on that?
So since I think it does not really fit to my project, because we are working with school children, with primary school children, and maybe the school systems are different or even completely different from that in Germany, I did not thought about going abroad, but maybe there could be a plan that I go abroad. But this is really like in the future, as I'm at the beginning of my doctorate.
Okay, I see. Yeah, I guess it, as we already touched on, it has to make sense within your whole doctorate, if it makes sense to go abroad or not. And I guess, yeah, thank you first of all for your fascinating contributions on the topic of like planning and actually applying for your doctorate. Before we go on with the next section of our discussion, I want to, quickly summarize what we just heard. My key takeaways were here that the whole application process with contacting your supervisor, or first of all, from the perspective of the professors, finding the right doctoral candidate is very crucial. And that, for example, studying abroad should be considered if it fits to the project, and that it can also be financed with either working at a research institute or also through getting a scholarship. And in the next block, we will look at tasks and hurdles that one is confronted with while completing the doctorate.
Yes, and talking about hurdles, 3 out of 4 students experience a writer's block during their studies. Writer's block is a condition primarily associated with writing, in which an author is unable to produce work new work or experiences a creative slowdown? Did you ever experience writer's block during your doctorate maybe? Or what would you recommend to others who experience such a blockade, and how to overcome it? Joachim, what is your experience in that? Do you have doctorate students who couldn't write because...
So first of all, I have to say that I'm a bit reluctant to these modernistic diseases. So if I look at how many people these days have burnouts and mental health issues, I think these things are much more observed and studied than they were in previous times. That's why we might have the impression that they are more frequent. I mean, what happens is if you just, I had this once with a doctorate candidate, if you just on a Friday evening say goodbye to the team and say, okay, on this weekend I will start writing my thesis. And then you go home and sit down with an empty piece of paper and begin. Then it is not astonishing that the person will on Monday morning come frustrated to the office and say, I didn't manage to write a single line. I told him that's what I could have promised you in advance. This is not the way to write. So which means, but I wouldn't call this a writer's block or so. This is just the wrong approach to writing. So what I always say is you should start writing your thesis on the first day you begin with your PhD project. So start your final document, whether it is Word or LaTeX or whatever, start it, make a table of contents, empty at the beginning, make a list of references, empty at the beginning, and then every day, every time you are doing something, you are doing some measurements, you are doing some experiments, you are doing some computation, just take the table, take the graphics you made for a publication, for a presentation, for whatever, put it in there. Whenever you need read some piece of literature, insert it into your table of references. And this means that over the first 2 years of research, without actually writing, you create a document that is 50 or 60 pages. And when you then decide at the beginning of the weekend, today I start writing, that's very easy because you have the material, you just have to combine it, you have a lot of bullet points, you can turn it into phrases, you can just think about the structure, you see, oops, this picture would fit better in this chapter, and you can immediately do something. So I think the question is not that kind of a writer's block in the sense of, oops, I don't know what to write. If you have the material, and if you have the material always during the research phase updated, inserted into that document, then writing in terms of producing sentences is just a technical thing. Of course, people have different abilities in producing text. That's, of course, an experience you also make at the bachelor thesis, maybe even at school, that some people produce 10 pages within 1 hour, and this is a decent kind of text. That are people that choose this as their profession. And then there are people, typically engineers are considered to be of that kind, where the elaboration of producing text is not that high. That's, for example, why you are also, if there's a discussion on television, if there's a philosopher and an electrical engineer and a physicist, typically the philosopher dominates everything. And he's probably the poorest on stage. He's maybe also the scientifically and impact related, not the most successful on stage, but he's the one who entertains. And the technical people typically answer to a question more in the yes and no style. And there you see that there's a different level of writing skills. And of course, someone who has this gene, it's easier for him or her to create text. But I think this blocking thing that I really don't know what to write, this can be solved to a large extent if you avoid a situation where you start writing on something without having the material, because this is, of course, but this is an unnatural situation. I would not start, and I would say that the writing is just too early, or the material is not yet there.
Thank you very much for also sharing your method. I think it could help a lot of students here. Catherine, have you also used this strategy, or are you currently using it?
So first note to myself, obviously I'm on the right track because, okay, to be honest, I'm a very structured person, but as I started my PhD, I did a table of contents, and I already had my first presentations and my first results from the pilot study, and this is really what I do. I fill my dissertation with the results and the text I already have, and at the end maybe I can combine everything with literature. Of course, I also do literature research when I have time to do it, but I think this is really a good strategy.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And since we're like talking about problems during your doctorate, you said you just started it, but maybe was there already a point when you wanted to quit?
So not yet, but maybe it's also part of my nature, because I'm a very resilient person, and I think it's important that you have a proper stress management. And of course there will be tough times, I know that, and of course there will be challenges, but I try to tackle these, or maybe not, maybe it's the wrong word to say tackle. I really try to grow from challenges and foster my personal development, because if I think, oh, that's an obstacle I cannot overcome, this does not help me. So I really try to get out of everything, the best out of every situation, because this is what I decided to do. I want to do a PhD, and
That sounds like you're very convinced of what you're doing.
Yeah.
But I'm asking this question because the dropout rates for doctorates in Germany are actually not that low, because for doctoral students who are employed at a university or research institute, actually 13% of them quit their studies, most of them after their second year, so also somewhat late. I don't know, to the professors maybe, do you have experience with doctoral candidates who kind of quit, or how did you help them, or what was sort of their coping mechanisms? How did they deal with it?
What are these numbers? So are these German?
Yeah, there was a report from the German Federal, I think, some institute for young researchers.
Okay.
And it was pretty recent, from 2019.
So my personal experience is smaller numbers. So I had, I think, something like 56 or 57 now completed, and there was one who quit. This was actually a decision that I supported in the end, because he was actually very successful, but he felt that this was not the path which he would like to go. And so if it would just be doubts of being successful, then I would have tried to convince him that don't worry, that everything is perfect. But it was more, I'm thinking I'm sitting in the wrong train. I know the train runs fast and the train will bring me to a city, but that's probably not the city but where I would like to arrive. And then I said, okay, then you should change the train, and it's probably better to do that. But so in my experience, it is not that frequent, but of course for very different reasons it occurs. It can also occur that the private setting changes, or whatever, that you have or want to move. So there are many reasons. So I think one should support, if there is something, it strongly depends on what is the reason. If the reason is in the supervision construction or in the group construction also, then of course there should be some attempts to repair. If the reason is more in self-doubts, I don't know whether I am able to do that or so, then it depends on what you feel. Typically, you will feel that this is not an issue, then of course one has to try to repair it. But if there is a very clear decision and if there are reasons where basically a repair is not reasonable, then of course I personally think one also has to support this quit decision then.
Yeah, I also think if it's like a matter of personal circumstances, you shouldn't, as a supervisor, force them to continue their doctoral studies just so that you have someone who, I don't know, does your seminars or works for your...
No, I mean, that's nonsense.
No, but like, just you shouldn't, even though we earlier talked about commitment, so if you have a doctoral candidate who wants to quit, you shouldn't like force them to say it.
There is one thing which is a bit complicated, one has to be aware of, that there is not only in the context of quitting, but there is at least a double relation between supervisor and candidate, and if there is an employment situation. And the one is the mentorship thing, so supervisor and supervisee, so they work together on the doctoral project. And the second relation is, in terms of a boss. So if you are working in a group, if you have some kind of, as we say in Germany, E13 position at whatever percentage, then of course the professor is also the people who has the responsibility in terms of human resources of this. So in terms of developing, but also in terms of allowing the vacation and all these kind of things. And there can situations where these two relations are not fully in parallel, but they point into different directions, and both sides have to be aware of that. So this is typically not a source of conflicts, but one has to be aware of that these relations are in many cases multifaceted. So it's not just one dimension. It's not just a doctoral thing. There is more around.
Okay, yeah, I guess that makes sense.
May I add a question about the candidate who didn't finish his studies? Do you think it was good that he tried until whatever time he stopped, and why didn't he stop earlier?
That's a good and a complicated question. What is early? What is early? What is late? So actually, he approached me rather late, when also I felt that the decision was basically done. And he said that he had a lot of discussions with colleagues, with his with his family environment before. So I think he just wanted to make a well-founded decision. And this is also, I think, there are differences in personalities. So there are more conservative people who only change the situation if they really think, I have to change. So this is not appropriate. I think nevertheless a nice comparison is if you are in a traffic jam on the Autobahn and the radio tells you there is a recommendation of using this U something. There are people who stay on the Autobahn because by experience or because of personality they think at the end of the day, typically I do better staying in there. Who knows what kind of jams expect me if I now go on this way around, and all the other cars do so. And there are other drivers who always, if some problem occurs, they always use any kind of opportunity, lane change, or going onto these other routes to try something. So this is also a question of personality, whether you first try to stay on the road, or whether you try, or whether you are more a person if some opportunity pops up, or if something can be decided, you think you should try a kind of a change. And I think this was more the person who really tried to make a sound decision and only go into the talk to me or then really do this decision when he was really decided. So that's why that was my explanation for that. It was relatively late, but I think from his perspective, it made totally sense how he did it.
And do you think he could have found out he doesn't want to do it earlier? So I don't know, how long did he stay with you?
I think, so he went to industry afterwards, and he said, he asked me whether he could call me after 3 years if he detects that this is also not the thing he wants to do. And I said, of course. So yeah, I think this is a kind of a decision, and you don't make, so, and he did it, and that's maybe even more complicated if you do this from a position of success. If I exaggerate now, but if anything you try in the first 2 years fails, then the decision to quit is easier. If everything you do in the first 2 years succeeds, and you nevertheless have the feeling this is not the right thing, then the decision is much more complicated. And everyone you talk to and communicate this will tell you, guy, are you crazy? So you have just won the Olympics, the gold medal, and you want to change your sport? What's wrong with you? So but nevertheless, you can have the feeling that this is not the right thing, and that's why I think in this case it took a bit longer, because he was very successful and it was everything on a good track. Nevertheless, he thought that his thing is more industry and not science.
Kathleen, the next question is for you, because you already kind of shaped what is happening after a PhD if you remain in the academic sector. Can you tell us more about your experience with the postdoc phase and maybe the tenure track program at the TUM?
Okay. So again, I mean, this was my path, and not everybody aims for an academic career, and there's still very good reasons, I think, to do PhDs and even postdocs. So I mean, it's not the question, oh, when is the point where I decide that this is not the right path? If you have a good time, if you learn new things and advance as a person, as a scientist, it's still okay afterwards to do something completely different. And not even just this industry academia decision, there's so many other things to do as well. But for me, yeah, it was always, I loved universities, so I never really wanted to leave them. I loved the student life, and this is what you can maintain for a long time, even as a postdoc. Typically, it's very low hierarchies, and you're part of an, young and interesting team of people, and you also share a lot of your free time. And yeah, I was driven by the research questions I was working on, so this was always the next step, and I wasn't planning it essentially, but meeting people, meeting professors at conferences, and then saying, hey, that's the person I want to work for next. And but yeah, the goal at some point is, of course, do I land this academic job, right? And this is tough. I mean, this is clearly a time where you're doubting whether it all makes sense, whether it was worth it, whether you ever have a chance. I also had a couple other options just before I started an independent academic career. I'm very happy I didn't go for them in the end, but yeah, the tenure track system you're asking about, so this is, I don't know how familiar are people when they're in their studies. So professors in these days are not necessarily hired as full professors. There's also the option of starting quite young. I mean, for me, it was still in my mid-30s, but being a professor, being very independent, but still having this phase of 6 years where you're, still not in a permanent position yet. You're evaluated at the end, whether you were successful. You're measured by how many papers you've published, how much grant money you get in. Also, your teaching is, of course, evaluated. And only after that phase, you become a permanently employed, a tenured professor. So this is where I'm currently at. I've just made it through the first 2 years. And I mean, I do like the system, the way it's done at TUM, because you are independent from the very beginning. And I think you're also taken seriously by your colleagues immediately. And they are actually planning with you, right? If you are evaluated positively, you're gonna have this permanent professor position here at TUM, which is not the case everywhere, which is you know, in the old system, doing habilitation or being a junior professor typically meant you have to move again for sure. They typically won't have a full professor position for you at that place, and this is something that the TUM system at least, you know, suggests. And yeah, let's see how it goes in the next years. But so far, I'm pretty happy. So I mean, if people have questions about this, I don't know, we can talk about it later maybe. But I guess for most of you guys, that's quite far away, right?
Okay, yeah, thank you. And like keeping an eye on the time, as there are only a few minutes left, I would like to invite you to share any experiences or also insights from your past you wish you had known before starting, or Karl, in your case, not starting your doctorate, that you want to share with our listeners. So just like a brief impression of what you wish you had known before. So maybe Karl, let's start with you.
I wish I would have known before not starting a PhD.
What have you known that made that you didn't do a PhD?
So I guess to me, figuring out over time that I still need to figure out what I want to do was an important part of my decision. And seeing that with starting a PhD, I felt like later on, I'll still not be sure if I want to do it. And I might be locked in and pretty much just keep going because now I have a PhD in that specific field, and now I'll just do the logical next step without knowing what I want to do. So I think noticing and really realizing that I want to try out a bit more was for me the reason not to start. Obviously a PhD or a doctorate gives you a lot of freedom to test stuff as well, but to me it was just not the right way to test.
Okay. Yeah. Kathleen, do you want to go on?
Mm-hmm. So actually, I cannot remember one point that would have been helpful for me to know it before, but maybe that is why I was really thinking about doing a PhD very early. So for me, actually, it was my dream. I quit my job for that. I did my bachelor's, I did my master's, and I always wanted to do the PhD. And maybe I can advise you really to get in contact with people, with other PhD candidates, with the chair you want to work at, to gather all the necessary information to really take a proper, good decision if you want to make your PhD at that chair, at TUM, elsewhere, or maybe you want to completely quit it. And I think that really helped me that I have this network. I even did my master's thesis at the chair or in collaboration with the chair I'm working at, and I think that really helped me a lot.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And Hans-Joachim?
Actually, I liked very much everything I didn't know before that I didn't know it before. Because I fear that I would have made a couple of decisions in a different way if I had known some things before. But I like the decisions, how I made it. And then that's what I think we have today, this kind of insurance mentality that we must know everything from advance, the pros and the cons, and plan everything. And yeah, it is kind of an adventure, and not foreseen things happen. And this in particular true. So actually I never intended to do any of these steps I did. For example, when I was studying in last years, I did not intend to go for a PhD. Just a couple of months before I was done, I was addressed by a professor whether I would not like to do it. And then I thought, well, otherwise I would not now have to look for a job. And if there's something is offered to me, this doesn't seem so. And the same happened after the PhD. Professor asked me whether I would not like to continue because he would consider that this is serious, and we had a serious discussion whether he was really thinking that or only telling me. And then I decided again, well, it's nice, it looks promising. But for example, if I had foreseen that the amount of time you can afford to use for science goes down at my current status to less than 5% of the time, then I guess I wouldn't have done it. But I like that I have done it. So I think it's okay if we don't know things.
All right. And Kathleen, you're...
Yeah, I mean, I had the longest time to think, but I also can come up with something that I really wanted to know beforehand. I probably would also tell my earlier self to, not to worry too much. Like these kind of, there's always a next step, and it may not be the one that you originally thought it would be, but then there was another door opening, another person you met, not to be too, I mean, sure, you work hard and you know, we're all very ambitious people, clearly, but to definitely enjoy everything around as much, because, I mean, I think nothing is more painful than you like only worked super hard on something you're maybe not even fully convinced of, right? And then, you know, someone else comes in first and publishes that or whatever, and then you say, oh, I should have, you know, gone for this other thing, which I'm really excited about. So don't worry too much about the consequences of things. This is maybe something I would tell my, I don't know, earlier master thesis kind of age self. But I think that got better over the years. So I have still a lot of reason, I guess, to you know, worry. Is it now going to work out with a professorship? With, you know, what I worry about most is you know, my PhD students, my people, that they make it, that they have, you know, a good project and so on. But I guess this whole, you know, let it happen and response to the options that are coming to you, this is probably something I would say, to myself. But other than that, I also don't know.
All right, yeah, that was quite interesting.
Yes, thank you all for your great contributions on the topic of how to make it through your doctorate. Before we move on to the finishing Q&A session, which I would go just after this, I would like to briefly maybe say a few words about what we learned today. I think it's really important to be passionate about the topic you are working on. It's very important to have a strong motivation, and at the end, it's really a personal decision. I think it's what we learned here this afternoon, and so with that, I now welcome the audience here as well as our listeners online to our Q&A session. To the people here on site, please feel free to raise your hand and ask your question. Maybe you could just tell us your name and maybe what you're studying.
Your doctorate.
Yes. No, maybe what you're studying right now, because so the answer can be more precise. And for the people online, please use the chat function. I will make sure to include your questions into the Q&A as well. So, any questions?
I can ask a question.
Yeah.
So my name is Honor and I study neuroengineering. My question would be thanks. Let me tell about myself again. My name is Honor and I study neuroengineering. The question is, if I apply to a PhD position, for example, through a graduate school or the professor themselves, with the graduate school, would that be different in the case that, for example, they ask us to write some papers where we're supposed to kind of pinpoint the topic that we're supposed to work on? I was wondering if that is something that I should be aware of beforehand, because that is something I struggle with. I was wondering if the motivation itself would be sufficient, or should I somehow fake it?
Don't fake it. Don't fake anything. If you have to fake it, it's not the right job, I guess. Yeah. But it does make a difference whether it's a graduate school, because as we said earlier, then it's usually a bit, you know, more general, your application, because you may not even know who you in the end will work with, right? If you already have a lab in mind and a professor in mind, you can address very specifically what you're excited about. That does not mean that you have to come up with, you know, the next brilliant idea and you already have to outline your full PhD. This is not expected typically in an application, but if you have ideas, if you have your own ideas, I mean, be brave enough to write them down also in a motivation letter. So I would love to read that, right? Yeah.
And just look what they want. There are a couple of application processes where, for example, they point maybe even to a web page, and that there you see the 27 currently open research projects, which are the ones you would be interested in. And then, of course, you should not ignore that. But in many cases, this is not the case, and then there's just a general motivation expected. So I think this is the important thing. Just look what the process really expects from you, and then try to do it, but actually never fake. This won't work. It won't work maybe for this decision step, but you won't get happy with that.
Yeah, I understand. Like the way I asked is because to understand applying through yourselves, I thought it would be more interactive in a way that we could discuss whether the research is applicable, or we could add up on that. But while applying to a main channel such as a graduate school, I was.
But also in the individual situation, it depends. It depends, for example, whether I have currently an open state position, which is not topically binded. So we can just define on a research you would like to do. If it is just a third-party funded project, I have written the proposal, it has been approved. Well, there's actually not that much to discuss. The question is just whether you would like to do this project or not, because the milestones and the things that have to be done are predefined. So all these kind of things depend, and one has to be flexible in the way that if you see that there is an option where you bring more in of your own ideas, just do it. If it's more the situation that you can choose among 3 projects, then probably it's not a good strategy to start a discussion about a possible 4th one.
That answers my question. Thank you so much.
But make sure you send everything you're supposed to send. So this is actually annoying. I mean, it happens so often that, you know, you ask for a letter, a CV, the transcripts. You often also want contact details of 2 people that I could call then for references. And these things, if they are listed somewhere, they should also be part of your complete application. I mean, this is a no-brainer, I guess, but it happens very often that you get incomplete applications. Yeah.
Okay, and we also received some questions from the chat. The first one is from Blavish Piano. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. It was the question, when you have a 75% PhD doctorate position, do those students actually work 6 hours per day, or do they work full-time? I don't know, maybe Kathleen or some of the professors can give some insight.
I mean, so if it's a 75% position, the legally correct thing is that the duties are also reduced. And that's what, for example, when we have this rare situation that we only have through a program or so a 75%, then we really try to map this. Either we try to get the 25% that are missing from some other source, or if it stays with the 75%, then compared to those other folks who have 100%, we try also to remove, to reduce the teaching load and all these kind of things. This does not always work in terms of, is it exactly 75%? But we try, of course, to match the funding situation also. It's not in the sense of 6 works per day. I mean, science does not work that you come in the morning at 9, you stamp, and at 5 you stamp again, and then you leave. This is not the way how science works. So the work life of a scientist is more complicated, and definitely it's not that much separated between private life and job life, because, well, if you are doing something filling gas into cars at a gas station, if you are at home, you don't think about the next day with the gas station. You are just at home and you do something different. If you are thinking about an interesting problem, you just cannot avoid that even during dinner or after you brought the kids to bed or whatever, that you start thinking again on your project. So there's no direct mapping onto working time, but the workload, of course, it should be mapped. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And Kathleen, do you have similar experiences? I mean, from your work day or?
So in my case, I work like 100%, even if I'm not paid 100%. But I want to make the best out of my project. So this is the commitment I want to give. And since I said before, I love what I do, and then it's not like work for me, but it really fulfills me, what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also, from my experience, what I heard from my colleagues. A lot of them only have 65% contracts, and the teaching duties are reduced, of course, but they have more time to write their doctoral thesis, so it kind of evens it out, I guess. And another question from the chat we received is from Shafkat Ali. Being an international student, PhD aspirant, how can we contact supervisors other than email? As I emailed most of the faculties, but I don't get a response. So I think we already touched on that a little.
So international student here or somewhere else?
I don't know, it doesn't really specify.
Yeah,
but
so I mean, that's really, so from somewhere else, that's what I said in the beginning, it's really complicated. On some days I get 20 or 30 emails of this respected sir kind, and you cannot just track. In particular, if you think that you find everything nationality diversity, gender diversity, if you find everything in the pool of the respective master programs you have there. If someone is in our study programs and sends me an email, I try to answer. So maybe if you don't get an answer, this is also kind of a hint what kind of climate and whether you would like such kind of a person as a supervisor. So I say maybe. There can be many reasons, but anyway, the best probability or the highest probability way of contacting is the contacting on an occasion. So if you are in a seminar, if you are in a lab course, if you do the master thesis with a group and you have your final presentation, if you join things like Junge Akademie, and if you are for 12 days with 2 professors in a course, then there are plenty of opportunities. Then it's a good time to get into talk. If you have the advantage of being on site, don't fall back into the anonymous, I sent to 50 professors an email whether they would like to be my supervisor. So this is a thing you would also do when you were in Burkina Faso or in Uruguay. If you are here, you should use the things that are possible to contact, and always use an occasion, because if there's an occasion, if there's a course, if there's a talk, if there's something like we have it here, this is always a better occasion to get into a first contact, to start a conversation, than just sending a more or less anonymous email.
Yeah, I see. So I guess even for students who didn't do their master at TUM, I guess it's also, well, good advice to really seek out the personal contact and, yeah, not just like knock on your door and be like, hey, is there a doctorate position for me? But I guess it's always important to.
And there the applications through these kind of grad schools, or however they are called, is typically the better way, because they are actually aiming at this. They have a portal getting in applications without this one-to-one relation. If you get into a one-to-one, want to get in a one-to-one discussion with a professor, this is a much less anonymous first thing. So you need some kind of an occasion to really catch him or her.
Yeah. Okay. Hope this answers the question.
Do we have other questions in the audience, maybe? Yes.
Hello, my name is Bo Jianhuang. I want to know what plays a more important role when a professor choose his or her doctorate candidate. I mean, the grade, Forschungs Praktikum, or something else plays more important role. Thank you.
Well, there's a nice German word where I don't know any kind of English corresponding thing, and this is Gesamtkunstwerk. So the thing which is important is not the one thing. The thing why I go into the endeavor of starting a kind of a relationship with a doctorate candidate for a doctoral project is because I am convinced that this is the right constellation. And this is not due to one experience in a lab or one seminar talk. This is really something which has many, many facets. I have some discussions with him or her. I'm convinced of the motivation, I'm convinced of the enthusiasm, I'm convinced of the skills. I had several occasions where I or my co-workers got convinced about the skills. So, and this forms typically when he or she is here in the master studies over a couple of semesters, this forms over time a picture, and then at some point I am convinced that this is the right person. And exactly in the same way it should be the other way around, that you have several occasions where you get in contact with a group, with the topics the group is dealing with the professors that are around there, and then over the time the picture should shape. I guess this is the place where I would like to be, at least at most of the time for the next couple of years for my PhD project. Independent of mobility, of course, you should go also abroad for some time and so on. But this is not the one and only thing, and you have to be very good there, and then this increases the chances. No, for me, this is really a very complex picture that gets a complete thing over time.
So maybe you can call it whole package, so that you don't have to be good in a specific or particular aspect, but have like the whole package.
Yeah, it's like a decathlon. At the end, the number of points, well, we don't make points and we don't count, but anyway, so the complete performance counts, and not whether you were the best one in this or in that. Yeah.
But what you described is a very, time-consuming process, and it's, I think, a luxury situation that if you only choose from this pool of students that you get to know over maybe even years. I mean, it's ideal, but I guess people also have a chance applying from the outside. I mean, for sure, there is email applications of people I've never seen that I still get very excited about. And that's what I agree with, the whole package fits. If, of course, I see good grades, maybe also good institutions where people have been. Ideally also maybe they have worked already in their masters with a colleague that I know from somewhere else. If then, as I said, this clear letter, not super long. I mean, professors don't have time to read like 3 pages of motivation letters. The first couple sentences must already get me and explain why you really want to work with me and what's exciting about our research. And all of this together then makes me interested enough to for sure reply. I mean, I try always to reply. To be honest, also I have this ready-to-go text that I just copy in for the applications that I'm not so excited about. I still think it's a good way to answer. But yeah, I mean, try to get that motivation across and get your documents in a way that I look at it and quickly see, oh yeah, that's an interesting candidate. That means a well-structured CV and so on. And I don't have the luxury of choosing from people that I know already for years, because I'm still quite young faculty, and I do consider applications from the outside as well, of course. Yeah. So that's also. But
don't start your letter with already at the age of 2 I was fascinated by chemistry.
Yeah. That's true. And yeah, the dear sir thing. I mean, I also get a lot of dear sir. But then it's 2 clicks for me to just send a nice and polite reply. And that's
so how should the letter start?
Yeah, with your name at least. I mean, it should address at least the professor it should make clear that you have looked up online what we are working on, and at least my name should be there. And
So
yeah.
there are at least two different groups of selectors. So one are the box tickers and the P counters, and they expect that in an application this and this and this and this is there. And in particular, I have the idea that in some companies I know it works this way, and if something is missing, they don't take into account this thing. For me, an application is the more attractive, the more unexpected it is. So I am always looking for the unique selling point. I was always looking with myself for the unique selling. I was asking me, why the hell should they hire me? There are good people all around. Maybe if when I do give the presentation, maybe if someone is in a better mood this day, he will be more convincing. So just relying on the competition is dangerous. So you must focus on the things where you really think that this makes you special. When I read this letter, to some extent, I want to get entertained. And if there's the same thing I have read 9 times is now written a 10th time, maybe a little bit better than the others. This is maybe a little bit better, but not really convincing. But if there is a letter that starts in a way I have never seen before, this is at least a motivation to continue reading. With a letter that starts in the same way as the 9 previous did, probably I say, okay, I do know something different. So that's really, I strongly belong to the second group. I'm always looking for the unexpected, not for the things I see in all these applications. All have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. All have good grades in their master's degree. All pretend to be motivated. This is something which is, of course, you have to write it to some extent because it's expected, but also include the unexpected. This really puts the salt to the soup.
Perfect. So I hope there is not any question left, because due to our tight schedule, we are running out of time. We should close our Q&A session here. However, as Monica already pointed out in the beginning, even though the official part of today's event is now over, we invite you to stick around for our networking session and some yummy appetizers there in the back. Here you will again have the chance to speak to our inspiring panelists. On that note, I would like to speak out a big thank you to all of you, to you four, Karl, Kathleen, Hans-Joachim, and Kathleen, and as well to the audience today on site and via our online stream.
Yeah, I can only agree with that. It was great to have all of you here. And I would also like to say a big thank you to the graduate school, the office of the TUM Junge Akademie, and of course our Pro-Lehre Media Production, who have organized this event and implemented it in such a technically perfect way. And yeah.
Thank you all, and stay motivated.